everybody. Episode 2 of Chapter 3 on culture. And we are going to start with the 4 common components that all cultures share. And the first one, symbols or gestures. So symbols, gestures, anything with it that carries a particular meaning recognized by people who share a culture. Anything meaningful that represents something else. So think of some symbols in this culture, right? And just things that pop off your head right away. And the Apple symbol is like something that so many students, when we're in a classroom, they've got their laptops up. Think of the Star Wars symbol, could be the golden arches. But the thought is, or at least what we're going to think of is, how do you know what they mean? Like, what meaning do we attach to them, right? Because we understand that symbolic meaning differs from culture to culture and also within a single society, depending on who you are, where you're at, how you grew up. And from culture to culture, we've really got to be careful with symbols and gestures because, I mean, this, for us, is a great job. In some cultures, that's the middle, right? And we know that that doesn't mean this, okay? So knowing what culture you're in and what those symbols mean, really important. I mean, what does this mean? All right? Most of you are going to say peace sign, but originally, right, that was used by Churchill as a sign V for victory. You know, several decades pass, and you've got the folks in the anti-war movement in the 1960s using it to mean peace. So completely flipping the meaning of that. So just like culture's not stagnant, our symbols and gestures and what we associate with them over time changing as well. All right. So what does this symbol mean to you? Yum or gross? When I was a kid, I think it meant yum. For me, at least personally, I don't even know how much actual food they serve there anymore. But usually we're pretty split on this one. All right, this is a good one. So I'm gonna show an answer from this one to the whole class from before. What does the middle light and the symbol mean to you? Now already you're laughing to yourself. In my class is always because we know, right? Survey says I need the sign or the symbol or gesture for facepalm, right? We know that the middle light means slow down, you've got to be safe. But most of us, even though we know that, actually put it into practice as go faster, right? And sometimes when we go through the intersection, people do what? That's right. Hit the roof or the ceiling of your vehicle. I don't know why, but it's like, I made it. Well, so one day I was opening up the mail and opened up a camera radar ticket, and it was Julie, right? And in our truck, and Julie was like total smiles, slamming, touching the ceiling, and like, yeah, I got to get through this fight. So when she came home that night, I said, hey, you know, just to be safe, you're a safe driver, right? She's like, yeah, absolutely. And I was like, you would never just go through a yellow light or cut through a red light or something like that, but a yellow light. No. And I was like, then what's this? Proof. And she just started laughing. We both started laughing. But we really know that although this symbol means something, we also have a different interpretation of it. And that's a great example of, even within a particular culture or a particular society, it's much different. It's much different driving in Colorado than driving in Illinois, rural Illinois, or Chicago, where I was born. So changes, symbols, and gestures, time to time, place to place. All right. What does the symbol mean to you? Southern pride, racist ideology, Skinnerd, the band, or get over it, you lost like a long time ago. I think that finally we started to re-examine this symbol. I think a lot of people have known exactly what it means for generations and generations. And now we've changed that over time, what that really means in the use that it was, the Confederate flag. And this wasn't even really used very much at all, if at all. And then now we come to a place where we're looking at, how do we honor and look at the past? And is that through a dominant lens or a disadvantaged lens? Furthermore, if these people were seceding and if they were treasonous and committing war crimes, why do we celebrate them? What does this symbol mean? Now, on the same token, do I think that everybody that's wearing a Leonard Skinner concert t-shirt with the stars and bars is inherently racist? No, I don't. So symbolic meaning differs even within a culture. All right, what's this symbol mean? All right. If you are a military individual or have been in the military at some time, you know exactly what this means. This means distress, right? When somebody elects to fly an actual flag upside down, there's an emergency or something is in distress and you have to respond to it. So has an actual meaning, and then how that has been used. And we have to understand that, like, let's take the flag, right? Rolling Stones thing, money, burning a flag, the peace sign flag, all the different versions of a flag. For the longest time, I mean, it was a sacred, sacred, sacred thing. I'm not saying it isn't now, but how we put it into use in culture in the 1950s and 60s, when the anti-war movement was coming out and people were like putting the flag on clothes, if you had an American flag patch on your clothes, on your pants, on your shirt, that was considered massively disrespectful. You fast forward 70 years to 2020, and it's the 4th of July. It's like Speedos and underwear and hats and shades, anything you can put the flag on, and that's considered patriotic. So even the same symbol over time carries with it much different meaning. All right, let's go to the number 2 thing, or component, common component that all cultures share, and that's language. Language is really the key to all culture. Once your language is lost, that culture is in danger of disappearing as well. And we've seen that particularly in Native American culture, as a lot of that has been oral traditions passed down, not always written down or logged in a certain way. And the next generation, a lot of those folks are losing that language, moving away from the reservation, and those cultures are getting disintegrated. So language is a set of symbols that expresses ideas and enable people to think and communicate with one another, right? So a system of symbolic verbal, nonverbal, and written representations rooted within a particular culture. And we know that I think it's over 80% of all of our communication, period, is nonverbal, right? So a lot of culture and what we're looking at now, language, doesn't even have to be spoken to be understood. It's a big deal. Language enables communication. It certainly illuminates our beliefs and practices so that we understand what they are. It roots a community to environment. A lot of cultures across the world, including Inuit cultures, like have however many different hundreds of words for the same word for snow, right? So those words and language for a given culture is different based on geography as well. It contributes to the cultural richness of the world. When we lose languages or the ability to communicate through a specific language, we're taking a hit, we're losing culture. And when a language is lost, it represents the erasure of history, knowledge, and then certainly of human diversity, right? So very, very, very important piece. And we know the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis is a really important piece of sociology. And that basically says that language shapes the view of the reality of its speakers. I mean, we're understanding life through a cultural lens of language, right? Our understandings and actions emerge from language, words and concepts. They structure just our very perception of how the world works, how people speak to us from a very early age, how they communicate to us right away is so very, very different based on so many things. And so we know that language just shapes our reality. That's how important it is. So the worlds in which different societies live are distinct worlds, not merely the same worlds with different labels attached. 1929, and that's where this hypothesis comes from. All right, number 3, values and beliefs, common components that all cultures share. So values, ideas, general standards. This is kind of the big notion, right? Values, what is right or wrong, good or bad, desirable or undesirable in a particular culture. And these are also culturally defined standards by which people use to decide those things. Just what is good and what's not, what is beautiful. And they serve as these sort of values do, these big overlying broad guidelines for social living, right? So what's a value? Nationalism or patriotism, right? Right after 9/11, immediately the change that I noticed was people were flying their flags again everywhere, right? And when my parents were young, everybody put their flag out. And when I was little, every day. And I feel like that disappeared for 20 or 30 years or so. 9/11 happens, and suddenly, immediately again, support our troop signs in the yards and flags. And that's just obviously patriotism serves a really important function. So not making a value judgment on it, it serves to unite people. And of course, it can go past that and into nationalism and other things that aren't as desirable, but it serves a purpose. So patriotic values, right? Community values. What are our family values that we have, right? Values, though, because they're such big ideas, are statements of not necessarily what is, but what ought to be, okay? So these are key U.S. culture values from the 1930s, I believe, listed when this was taken. Equal opportunity, individual achievement, personal success, material comfort, activity and work, practicality and efficiency, progress, science, democracy, free enterprise, the notion of freedom, and of course, racism and group superiority. Now, some of these have changed over time, right? I mean, do we still value the things on this list? Do you think we value them more or less? I don't know. Hard work, maybe we value that slightly less, but people value material comfort even more. It would seem as if the last several years, science is under attack and is not valued as much. Racism and group superiority, it makes it to this list because that's an actual value of this country, and it still is, like decades and decades, hundreds of years later. So some of these not so desirable, some of them very desirable, and even the ones that don't help or add much to our culture, racism, group superiority, we still find that being an overriding value in our culture. So how do these things come to change? That's really the interesting part as a sociologist for me. And beliefs, now that we've got the big idea of values up here, now we get to our specific beliefs, right? Specific statements people hold to be true, particular matters that we believe as true or false, right? Sometimes beliefs are based on faith, superstition, science, tradition, experience. But as much as we try and maybe deny some of these or say that they're not as important anymore, or they come under attack, they still hold a lot of truth for us. I mean, gravity, we believe in gravity, right? We know that it's a scientific truth or fact. How do we know that? Because generally speaking, people aren't going to open up their third-story window and walk out because they believe, they know, right, that gravity's real. But when it comes to something like climate change, people, generally speaking, they can base that on superstition, they can base it on fact, they can base it on faith or opinion, and that's one of those that people test all the time, even though it is almost entirely based around science. So beliefs, smaller, specific, values, bigger. Beliefs may be understood as real when they are real in their consequences, right? So belief in witchcraft during the 16th century, we know that there's no basis of truth to that whatsoever. However, their consequences were real. People were burned at the stake. It was used as a way to control people identified as a gender female, women, and keep them in their place. Da-da-da-da. We could look at the same thing with racism, even though we know that racism is built on a foundation of completely untrue things. We know that that is still a belief, or people still make the consequences real. How do we know that? Housing, our wealth gap, access to education, access to healthcare is so much lower if you're a person of color. So they are real when they are real in their consequences, even though we know them to be perhaps scientifically completely false. All right, and finally, norms. So rules and expectations by which society guides the behaviors of its members. Look, I do what I want. You do what you want too, right? Little bit, right? I mean, society actually guides what we actually do every single day, dozens of times, and we don't even realize it much of the time. So norms are rules and expectations by which society guides the behavior of its members, and the most important ones apply everywhere and at all times, okay? So I like that we break up norms as sociologists into a couple different ways to understand it, kind of like latent and manifest functions. That way we kind of know why those are different. Mores and folkways. So mores, or taboos, are norms that are observed and have great moral significance. I mean, they are the difference between right and wrong, and you don't find a whole lot of arguing on that, right? Murder, it's wrong. Killing another human being, we know it's wrong. How do we know it's wrong? It says so in some of the texts and books that people have been following for a long time. The law has it written in there that that's going to be some serious repercussions if that's what you do. Another big one, or one of the biggest ones we have, mores, would be sex with a minor as an adult. Sexual relations with a minor if you're an adult. How do we know that? You know, we can look at prison riots. And when prison riots happen, or used to happen even more frequently in the 70s, 60s, 70s, 80s, they would round up, the prisoners would, other prisoners to use as bargaining chips. Do you think they did that with people who are pedophiles, who are convicted felons in as far as sexual crimes against children? No. Oftentimes, even the prisoners who are there for violent offenses would round up those people and eliminate them from the equation. They are the lowest of the low, even amongst our prisons, our total institutions. So we know that that carries with it a great amount of stigma, a great amount of punishment. Therefore, it's a more. Now, more casual, right, interaction norms are folkways. That's just the difference between right and rude. Let's say you give a eulogy at a funeral, and instead of being really somber, you're like, yeah, you hold up a big foam #1 finger like you're, at a sporting event. This guy was #1. People are going to look at that strange. Where do people sit when they're in a place? Like we go into a movie theater or a restaurant, where do people sit? Equidistant from each other most of the times. I mean, it would be really weird if you're in a movie theater and there's like 4 people in there, and the 4th person that walks in comes in and sits right next to you. What do? First thing that pops in your head. Yeah, you're moving. Like most likely, most of us are like, no. And that's how we know we broke or violated that norm. Passing gas in an elevator. I mean, there's all sorts of these casual ideas that I have here. Just the difference between right and rude. So norms, something that all cultures share. Mores are the real ones that are the difference between right and wrong. They've got great moral significance. Folkways, not so much, just the difference between right and rude. Okay? Mores, norms that may not be violated without serious consequences. Folkways, norms that may be violated without serious consequences. And then laws, written norms. And really, it's really interesting. Before we've gotten to the written norm thing, we could take masks, right? And we might think of that as like a folkway. They may be violated without serious consequences. But now we're seeing in a pandemic just how something can go or transition from a folkway to a more, right? Pretty quickly. So all of our norms, all of culture, all of society, we know that it's not stagnant. It's in a state of change always. Same is true with mores and folkways, but some have been the same for ages and ages and ages and are the same across cultures. All right, best example of breaking mores in this culture, passing gas in an elevator, not tipping at an expensive restaurant. By the way, here's how you tip exactly. There's no question. If you go out, and you know this because a lot of students are servers. If you've ever been a server, 20% at least, no matter what. If you are going to go out and eat, you need to tip. As my life hack or advice to you. You need to tip at least 20%. When Julie and I were younger, of course, we had hippies, long hair, and holes all over our clothes, and servers would look at us and they would give us horrible service. And do you think we tipped good? We did, because that's a rule. Sexual abuse of a child, men hugging for more than 30 seconds in public without the barrier of their arms. You know, right? Right? The folkway, that's the man hug. We've got a good barrier. And we put on a nice slap on the back, a good manly slap on the back. Anyway, yes, more is sexual abuse of a child. All right. Let's talk about now about ideal culture versus real culture. So ideal culture would be this notion of values, norms, and behaviors that people in a given society say they embrace, right? Like beauty is only skin deep. Well, that's ideal culture. But when human beings put it into practice, that tends to change, right? Real culture, in contrast, would be values, norms, and behaviors that people in a given society actually embrace and exhibit. We can look to conventional attractiveness or profiling with the police, and we might say We treat everyone equally. As we look at CRJ, criminal justice folks that end up going into law enforcement, that is definitely what we profess to embrace. That's ideal culture. In reality, in real culture, we know that people are profiled all the time. We understand that if you're a person of color, in fact, and you're a parent and your kids are out, I mean, one thing that I don't have to worry about as a member of dominant culture, person of European descent, that the police are going to be actively hunting my kids. That is not the same for people of color in non-dominant culture. So even though police say, you know, we do this equally across the board, we understand that that's in practice not a reality. So cultural inconsistencies then, and of course that is the contradiction between the goals, right, of ideal culture and the practices of real culture. Equality and justice for all of the systemic injustice that are statistically measurable, like in our criminal justice system. We could just look at one part of society, but we know that it goes across the board, and that could be everyone has access to housing. Not true for people of color for generations and generations. People should be paid equally. That's ideal culture. We already understand that. We know that people who identify as a gender female get paid quite a bit less. Same experience, same education, same injustice, right? All right. So subculture. I think these are always really interesting. And I think the difference between counterculture and subcultures we're going to talk about here, just like latent and manifest functions or mores and folkways. So subculture, cultural patterns that set apart some segment of a society's population. I mean, everybody, forget almost everybody, everybody is part of several subcultures. Could be region, interest, ethnicity, or by accident. Animal husbandry, right? The folks that take care of Cam the ram, folks on campus that are like, do the agricultural sciences. Can you tell them coming from a mile away on campus? Yeah. How? Well, they have specific knowledge and even dress a specific way. Big belt buckles, boots. How about if you're an athlete, right, on campus? Absolutely. Certain terms that are part of that subculture, certain cultural patterns, and you, again, can identify folks in a subculture sometimes from a long time or a long ways away. Athletes, same type of thing. Or we could even look at middle-aged professors with their tight jeans and their leather bags and their nice shoes. Star Wars geeks, yes. Gamers, blues musicians, restaurant workers. Look, everybody here has identified with more than one subculture. And so it's like, I would ask right now in my class, what subculture do you belong to? Is it snowboarders? I don't know a lot about snowboarding. I don't ski or snowboard, but I know that there's a whole set of language. Shredding, gnarly, pow pow, bruh. Right? And all grinding and smoke shack, right? All sorts of these things that are specific knowledge to people that are in those subcultures. And sometimes, like I said, it could be really anything. All right, counterculture. Now, countercultures are much different. Those are cultural patterns that strongly oppose those which are widely accepted in a given society. So countercultural favor really a collective being and a cooperative lifestyle in that being is more important than doing, right? Some people dropped out of society in the 60s, hippie culture or whatever, counterculture. Could be flower children, could be the Ku Klux Klan. Do they still exist today? Sadly, yes. Neo-Nazi skinheads? Absolutely. Same thing, right? Cultural patterns, or those people are opposing cultural patterns that are widely accepted in society, meaning people are equal based on the color of their skin. Nope, that's how we know those people are counterculture, right? People should contribute to society. If you dropped out of society, nope, counterculture, right? People may be living off the grid. So A or B in your own mind, counter or subculture, or excuse me, subculture or counterculture. All right, upper left-hand corner with the Nazi symbols, obviously counterculture. The cheerleader in the middle, subculture. I'm not sure what they'd be really resisting anyway. All right, my grandma at a cannabis protest. She's not my grandma, but I love her just the same. Now this one's trickier. See, the other ones were easy, but now we've got grandma at a camp. So now geography. What state does she live in? It could be counterculture if cannabis is still illegal in that state, or it could be subculture, right, if it's legal. So geography, legal status, whatever that might be. So we're going to say this could be both depending. All right, down here in the lower left-hand corner, bodybuilder. I asked this question in my classes, so I know this. On one hand, subculture. Even for that, it could be subculture. People like to get ripped. They enter contests. They eat a certain way. They have a certain body image. That's their thing. And there are even if drugs are involved, and I think if drugs are involved, generally speaking, we're like, oh, they're doping. That's counterculture. But now, as I understand, there are whole entire bodybuilding competitions where they know that people are using drugs, and that is acceptable within that subculture, right? Oh, Star Wars wedding. I love Star Wars, but I would never do that. And then in the bottom right, counterculture, subculture, depends. Is that just a gathering? Is it a video people are making? Is it actual members of a gang? Sometimes people that are students perceive that to be counterculture because it looks like they could be flashing gang signs or something. Again, geography, situational, what is it like? Where are you? And how are those people experiencing their life? Are they really resisting cultural patterns that most people accept? And if we look at culture, we know what the U.S. does best is understand itself, and what it does worst oftentimes is understand others. Carlos Fuentes, Mexican writer. I think that's true when we look at culture. We're not always able in our culture here in the United States to embrace the diversity that represents us and that has been a part of this country, since the people that came to this country stole the entire nation from our indigenous folks. All right, question. In your opinion, does everyone have equal access to opportunities, social, economic, etc., in the United States, regardless of race, religion, age, or ability? A, yes, or B, no? All right, we're going to end it there, folks, and we'll pick up with multiculturalism when we get to Chapter 3, Episode 3 next time. Cue the music. I don't want to pull anything. Anyway, folks, be good people and do good things. And I hope the semester is going well for you. Reach out to me if you need anything because I'm here to help. Peace, everybody. Take care.